Hello, everyone, and welcome to this show of Wisdom Keepers. And today our guest is Dr. Adhi Two Owls. And for those of you that may not be familiar with Dr. Adhi, I have a bio here. Just so happens I have a piece of paper. So Dr. Adhi Two Owls is an artist, a shaman, dowser, and a person curious about how the world works. Adee studied painting, printmaking, photography, and sculpture at the Kansas City Art Institute. In 2013, she received her PhD in philosophy and therapeutic counseling for her research in the effectiveness of indigenous healing on mental and physical wellness. She has been an active supporter of scientific dowsing and finding ways to make dowsing relative to the current needs of the planet. She served on the board of the American Society of Dowsers, and she was past president of the American Society of Dowsers. Adee has traveled to all over the United States, Canada, and internationally as a teacher and lecturer. She currently lives in New Hampshire and runs a thriving studio and continues to explore the amazing world around us. Welcome, Adee, to the show.
Thank you, Melinda. Well, I'm so glad to be here. This is so awesome.
Well,
and the magic of technology.
Yes, I love it. I'm in Hawaii where it's sort of warm right now. I would like to say it's much warmer, but we're having a little snap. It's only 60 degrees.
Well, I heard that you guys were having some blizzard. I was thinking, I never thought I'd ever see the word Hawaii and blizzard in the same sentence.
Yes, it was blizzarding on Mauna Kea. Yes. So, Adee, tell us something about yourself. Tell us, what drew you into the shamanic ways, and what were the steps? What were the signs? Were there things that just kept showing up in your life?
Well, it's interesting because, I grew up, pretty much a garden variety, working class, Catholic, East Coast, New Englander, and my experiences of spirituality were basically the Catholic Church and things like that. I was creative. And that was kind of, the thing I was nurtured towards, being creative. So, but nature always fascinated me. Like I was the kid who took out all of the animal books from the library and memorized, all of their names and where they came from. And I was the kid who was fascinated by all the horseshoe crabs on the beach. And when they'd get stuck between the tides, I'd go out and I'd pick them up and I'd put them back in the water so they could survive. And, so I had this sort of visceral way, which I was just kind of in the world, and everything kind of just turned me on. Like clouds turned me on, trees turned me on, animals turned me on, the ocean turned me on. And then I was creative, and I just liked making things. And I was curious about things, so I often took things apart and put them back together. And so I just had this very curious, very flexible, very dynamic way of being in the world. And of course, when you live in a world that has structure, you have to sort of take these wild, feral things and make them do things that are acceptable to society. So I went through, elementary school and high school. I went to an arts high school that kind of opened up my artistic development. And so I just kind of stuck with that as what I thought would be a career choice. So I studied painting, and then I went to the Kansas City Art Institute and I studied painting and sculpture. With like Dale Eldred and some other really amazing teachers that are still at that institute, But then somewhere around there, I just began to have these experiences where I just felt like time and space was bending, things couldn't be explained. I would ask questions of my teachers that I was working with, and I just felt like answers weren't coming. And I also kind of looked at the pipe of fine art, where I was funneling myself into. And I realized it was a world that was probably just going to chew me up and spit me out and make me into nothing. So I kind of left the fine art world and kind of wandered around aimlessly for a while. And then when I had my first Saturn return, I was 28. My life kind of unraveled, which happened. And
you had your first...
The Saturn return, Saturn returns in your astrology chart, you're around 28, 29. So, and your life kind of unravels and you have to kind of get real because Saturn's all about getting real. And so I came back from the Midwest to the East Coast, and that kind of began this weird shamanic journey that I began to walk into. And I can honestly say that I couldn't call it shamanism for a long time. I just was like, I wanted to live my life differently. And I was just willing to trust that things would be presented to me. I knew I wanted to be creative and I wanted to use my art because I knew that was a gift and I needed to do my gift. And that led me to different teachers, and some indigenous, some magical, some Western spiritual tradition.
I notice also that you have some Eastern, like Zen.
Mhm.
You studied some Zen.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I would have these dreams. This is part of like the interesting, like sort of just like you show up for life and you trust the process. So I didn't really know anything about Buddhism except it was a statue I'd see like in museums and things like that. But really my understanding of the Buddhist tradition was like Zippo. Okay. But I remember waking up one day and I had this desire to buy 100 beads and put them on a string. And how the dream kind of came to me was that I would take the beads and I would just hold a bead and I would just send loving kindness to somebody. And then I go to the next bead and I said, and it was just whoever came into my mind. So it could be like people I knew, it could be random people I saw on the street, it could be the person who served me coffee at the coffee shop. It was just like, that's what I was supposed to do with it. And I did. And, and I would find out later that's meta practice. Because I was like sitting one time on the green in New Haven, Connecticut, where I was living at the time. And someone came up to me and said, is that a mala? Are you a Buddhist? And I was like, no. What's a mala? And that sort of sent me into this other direction. But that's often how things are presented to me. I get them in dreams. And then or things begin to sort of fall together in a weird kind of way that lead me down a path. So I tend to be rather trusting and in the serendipitous process of how spirit wants me to walk in the world.
But what I find interesting about that is that you don't doubt that. See, some of us hear this calling or hear something, and then we think, is it real? Is it not real? Do I follow this? Do I relax? How do I follow this? I mean, it has to be such a strong seed of faith that runs through you that says, I'm being led in the right direction. I'm going there.
Well, and I think at some point in parts of my life, I realized that there's this voice inside of me, which is my ego. And if I listen to my ego, it's going to lead me down the path of destruction. And so I know that, like, when I hear another voice, something that I know is outside of my scope of understanding, that's probably the better option than what's singing around in my head about that's based on my own sort of little tiny perception of the universe. So it's part faith and just part survival. If I do what I'm here to do, I'm probably going to self-destruct on some level.
We've done that. We know what that's like, right? We bump around for a little while and then we go, okay, let's not do that again. Let's go back to the, internal faith, the listening, the deep listening. I think that requires an understanding of the listening, being still enough to listen. And this dream with this mala was really interesting. You didn't know it was called a mala. You really didn't know what Buddhism was about, but you were supposed to send loving kindness to each bead. That is brilliant. That's something that anyone in the audience can do right now. If you have a string of beads.
Well, I think that's the interesting thing about the work I do is that it's not attached to a tradition. It's not really I mean, it definitely has parts and pieces and tools and mechanisms. But I truly am a humanitarian. I truly believe that it's our humanness. And all of this is available to any human being on the planet. There's an equality to all of it.
Yes. It's humanism is what it is. It's learning. Yeah. It's this living with reverence and respect for humanity. And I love the way you approach all of your work in that way. Even the details of the drums that you craft and the malas now that we know that we're called, that you create. I can sense it in all of your pieces that I've purchased from you anywhere, that I've had the good graces to acquire. So you bring that sense of humanism and loving kindness to each of your practices is I feel that about you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think that's one of the things about spirituality and religion and all of these things, because a lot of them sort of say being a human isn't important. And I'm totally the opposite of that. I think we were given this body, and it is the most important thing we have to navigate this planet. I mean, that's why we can do dowsing or we can do art. This is the thing, you know, and we have to take care of it. We have to love it, you know, we have to nourish it and do all the things that we need. So that self-care, because if we don't take care of this, we're not going to know how to take care of everything outside of us. And I think that's one of the things that I see as a thread is there's so much self-hatred within human beings. We hate our humanness, and that is reflected in how we treat each other on the planet. I think that's also part of the changes we have to make, or at least the awarenesses that we have to come to.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes from the pressure of how we're supposed to look, you know, what we're supposed to be like, these false parameters that have been put around us, you know, that we're now, I believe, in this new era, starting to recognize that, okay, that was a line, you know, we're not going the party line anymore, right? There's a new line. There's a new direct party line to source that comes through us. And that's really the line that we only want to be connected to.
And I think that's the opportunity of where we're at right now on the planet. I think, you know, as horrible as some of the things are that are unfolding, this virus and just all the things that are happening, climate change, everything. This is an opportunity for us to recognize, you know, and rise to the evolutionary sort of gifts we have as human beings to figure out a different way to be on the planet, how to honor ourselves and each other, and to build things differently. So I think this is really a huge opportunity.
Yes.
You know, we've been talking about, you know, the change for a long time. You know, of course, there's been, you know, 2012 and this and that, but this is it. This is it. We're like in it. You know?
Yes. When you were talking about taking care of the body, it reminds me of why we have animals and why we have plants. It's like we're learning how to take care of ourselves through taking care of something else. You know, if you're a being and you look at your body as the most magnificent plant and you got to water it and tend to it and weed it and take care of it, you know, from that perspective, that's a whole new way of looking at the body other than something that you just feel trapped in.
Right. And I think that's
some of us used to feel.
Well, and I think that's the interesting thing about, like, you know, there's a conversation happening all over the planet between all these other sort of species and things, and we've disconnected from that conversation. I think that's also part of this sort of, you know, renaissance of humanity, is that we begin to participate in that conversation, not as someone who is trying to dictate it or control it, but we participate. And I think that's, you know, part of this whole self-care and being aware, like you said, taking care of plants and like just sort of sorting out what that all looks like. And
it's a cooperative, you know, co-creative process with this ever-changing cosmic, you know, energy that's happening around us.
Well, it's a collaboration, cooperation, and communication. Those are the three C's.
Yes, exactly. So tell us a little bit more about, you know, how you came into the work that you do. Do you work mostly with people? Do you prefer working with the land? I mean, are you just drawn to certain areas, or just whatever shows up?
I really like working with the land. Part of the last few years, I've spent a lot of time listening. I think that's my job, is to listen to what the earth has to say. I really have no business thinking I know anything. So, you know, I spent well, from like 2017 until March 2020, just driving across the country, just really teaching, but also going places and just listening. And that had a profound effect on just my understanding now that I'm here in New Hampshire, like where I need to go and what I need to sort of take that information and process it.
Were there any particular memories of that trip that really affected you that you could share with us?
Yeah. There were two things that happened. I'll say in the last trip, because I think that was like the most profound. So I was driving across the country and I stopped at RI, and then I went across to Phoenix and I did some stuff at the Phoenix chapter. And I went from Phoenix down to Organ Pipe in Arizona, which is a national park.
I'm just going to interrupt you. For those that don't know ORI, ORI is in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So you were driving from Fayetteville, Arkansas to...
I drove across country. I drove across to Phoenix, Arizona. Okay. And then I did some work in Phoenix, Arizona. I did there's a small chapter in Phoenix I gave a talk at, and I did a workshop. And then from there I went south to Organ Pipe National Monument, which is about 17 miles from the Mexican border. And I went there because I wanted to experience the desert. I had a calling to go to the deep desert because I knew the climate was in trouble. I knew the planet was in trouble. And I felt like if I went to the desert, here's a space, especially the desert in Arizona, there's a diverse spectrum of species living in some of the most extreme conditions, and they're thriving. And I thought, this is a place that I could go and I could get wisdom. So I went and I spent 6 days in the desert in the middle of like nowhere. Like literally I drove down a dirt road and I went and I parked my car and I was there for 6 days among the saguaro and the Red Mountains. And it was the most amazing experience. Like there was like no light pollution, and I've been in places where there's no light pollution. But the sky, the stars at night, there were so many stars, and it was moonless. I went during the new moon. There were so many stars in the sky, it lit up the desert. I have never experienced that before. And the stars were three-dimensional. You felt like you were in the universe. Okay. So I was there, and then I'm going around, and there's these ancient saguaro and these gigantic ancient barrel cactuses, and they've already bloomed, so they all have these crowns of yellow fruit along the top of them. And I'm standing in front of this one cactus, and I'm just sort of getting this download from this cactus. It's sort of saying, you need to understand how we live here, because that's going to teach you how to, learn to live with less water and less and all of that. And as it was saying this, because the universe likes to grant me confirmation, 3 of these gigantic yellow fruit fall from this cactus, like right at my feet. And right as it falls to my feet, I hear the cactus say to me, you need to take my seeds and you need to grow them, and you will understand what I'm talking about. And I was just like blown away. So I took these fruits and I have the seeds, and hopefully in the next, because they can stay dormant for hundreds of years. They just need water when they're ready. So I'm now in a place where I can sort of grow them and sort of experience what it's like to grow them, what they need, and all of that. So this sort of circles back to your taking care of plants, but also we learn when we take care of plants. We understand how they grow, how they are affected by light and their environment, and all of these things. So that was experience number 1. And then I went from there and I went to the West Coast and I taught, and I spoke at the San Jose chapter, et cetera. And I was getting ready to leave. Well, actually, when I got there, this amazing windstorm came in, kind of like blew trees down, and it was kind of a scene. But then when I finished teaching, I drove down Route 1 and I've always wanted to see whales. Okay, so I've lived and I've been different places. I just wanted to see whales. So I'm driving down Route 1 and I stop at sunset and I look out and I see these little rainbow sort of geysers coming out of the water. And I realized it's a pod of humpback whales. And so I watch it come from the north and moving south, and I watch them, and then they disappear. And I get in my car and I drive down a little further. I pull off again. And I do this like 8 times as I'm going down the coast. And in that moment, I realized, I don't know what's going to happen, but I feel like this is a sign that I'm going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And when I make that turn left on Route 127 to head east, to head back into the Mojave Desert, whatever happens, it's going to be okay. And I have a real strong connection to whale medicine, which is a whole other story. But I knew that was the sign. But that was that was profound, and then as I made myself across the country, that's when I heard about COVID and all of those things. So as I got closer and closer to the East Coast, I realized our world was going to change significantly, and of course it did. When I got back on the East Coast, everything just kind of collapsed.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Well, though that drive, that cross country, it sounds more like it was a cross country in multiple ways, like up and down and back and forth. When we're alone like that, and we do take the time, really profound things happen. When we're out there and we're trusting, things happen they come to us. Mm-hmm. They just show up for us.
And I really part of driving across the country as opposed to flying was, I feel like we're so disconnected to what's real. So part of it was also to be in the sort of, what's really happening on the planet? What's really happening to humanity? What's the real deal? So just sort of being in it, and not just like in the spiritual sense, but also in sort of like the real sort of grimy life stuff for people, and get that sense of,
yes.
of awareness.
So are there any innovations other than the mala that have come to you through your experience, other ideas of what you need to do or what you need to present to the world these days? That's a big one, huh?
Well, I think part of it is, I'll borrow a quote from Joseph Campbell. I think right now we're in the time of myth making. I think, human beings have lost, at least in the United States, we've lost our ability to be connected to our myths, our roots in that sort of sense. And I think that is something we have to recreate. So one of the things I've been working on now is, how do we tell stories? How do we create myths that are not necessarily taking myths from other traditions, but we are creating stuff that is relevant to where we are right now. So part of it is performance and storytelling and things like that. And others is, inviting people to tell their own stories and have them witnessed. So part of that goes into bookmaking. So teaching people how to make books, so that they can write stuff down, tell their stories. And also, as much as I love technology, writing and drawing and doing those things is a very different experience. And as much as I love this technology, if the plug ever gets pulled, it's gone. And I'm a real sort of like, we need to have these things in books. We need to have these things in stuff that will last thousands of years. So there's that. I've designed some dowsing tools, different kinds of pendulums that are in the works. I work with scientific radiesthesia or scientific dowsing, so I work a lot with the electromagnetic spectrum, and I work a lot with waves and particles, and I think dowsing has a potential to help us understand how to read the world better, how to uncover some of the things we can't see. But I think it also has to work with science, and it also has to work with some of the technology that we have out there. So I think we have to find ways to bring these worlds together. So I have some dowsing tools that I'm developing that are around that idea, like for finding water. I think right now, if I'm using my dowsing to the best of my ability, I think finding water for people is the most important right now because water is precious. But it's not just finding wells and helping people find water. It's also telling them to be good stewards of this water. They are responsible for this well. They're responsible for taking care of the safety and the wellness of this well, things like that. So there's that piece also. The next thing is developing techniques and tools for growing food. So that's the next thing. There's water, and how we take care of water dictates everything else. So our lives, our livelihoods, quality of life, but also how we grow food. So the other things, looking at agriculture, and I think that the horse is still out of the barn on that. We don't really know what we need to do. We have a lot of people on this planet, and I don't think any one technique is the way out, because we live in such diverse places with such diverse climates, and also climates are changing. So, part of it is addressing that too, and working with our dowsing to be part of that solution, to look at the planet in that sense.
In working with the land, are there any instances or stories that you can share with us about your experiences in land healing? In Hawaii, the word for stewardship is malama. So when you have land or water or anything, we're stewards of that. That's also the respect that we co-create, like the 3 C's you were talking about, right? Communication, co-create, and cooperate. Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things I started doing a few years ago is, so I've learned a lot of different techniques about, East means this, and it's this color, and we have to set up sacred space in this way and that way. And I just got to a point where I was just going, I sort of said, this is so colonizing. We go and we talk about, like we go and we go, yeah, we're going to do spiritual work. And what do? We just completely and totally oppress the land to do our will, and it's across the board. It's not just like the Western spiritual tradition. It's every tradition. They go in and we human beings think we know how to run the show. And so I started just kind of going into spaces and just sort of saying, what do you want me to see? What do you want me to pay attention to? What do you want help with? What do you want to help me with? So I began to just sort of go in and begin to sort of have this dialogue. And it sort of has morphed into, like, when I set up sacred space, I do the same thing. I go in, well, where would you like me to put the altar for air? And I talk to the land, and the land says, well, our air spirit lives here. So and it can be different in every place, but what it does is it invites a conversation. It invites this collaboration. It acknowledges that the land is conscious and sentient, that it has feelings and it has ideas, and it wants to be interactive. It wants to be engaged with, So, so when I set up sacred space now, that's what I often do. And the effects of that is found when we're actually working in collaboration with land. You can feel it, like the whole space tingles and is alive, and people actually do have, like, and I hate to use the word healing, because I think that's just like, people have transformative experiences in spaces where they feel like they're being seen and witnessed, not just by the people in that space, but by the whole world. They recognize they're part of the universe. They're part of this sacred enchantment, that they can be, that they're a meaningful part of the universe, that they're not just pawns in some weird god's game,
Right. We're not that.
Right. And that translates, like, also into, like, healing spaces and healing homes for people and businesses, things like that. So many years ago, I worked on a house that was built in the 1720s in Connecticut, and they were having some real difficulties with energies, and the couple that was living there was, like, on the verge of divorce. Like, they called me out of desperation. They said, you must come. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And I got there, and this is the first time I've ever felt like what I would call, like, wood spirits or fairies. But I got out of my truck, and I felt these things just kind of push me up against the truck going, help us. It's like, okay.
Well, that's clear.
So
right place, right time.
I did. So I talked to the homeowners, and I went out and I wandered around the land. And what I found out was they began to tell me the story, which is the other part of healing land. You have to listen to the story of the land. So the story of the land was, this house was built in 1720, and they basically didn't have a kitchen, and they didn't have anything, but they dumped their garbage down the bottom of the hill. And eventually it just kind of, built up and became the backyard. And then there was, add-ons and things like that. And they were just tired of garbage being dumped in the backyard. They were just tired of it. The spirits were just done. And I guess the insult to injury was that the people who were living there now wanted to build this elaborate sort of 3-tiered pond with all this sort of mega flora and landscaping, and they were just like, we've had enough. So I basically sort of said, okay, so what do you want? And they said, the pond has to go. They have to like make offerings and do all of this stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, all right, I need to tell these people that they need to like rip out the $100,000 pond.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to put on my shaman hat here. So I went in and I basically said, this is what the spirits said. This is what the sprites say. This is what the fairies are saying. If you do all these things, then it'll get better. And at first they were kind of like, and then they said, okay.
I bet they were. At first they were like,
Bearer of bad news. But they did. And within 3 weeks of them beginning this process, the energy in their house and their lives got significantly better.
Wow. So this pond was built upon these layers of garbage. And they took it out. Did they have to excavate, or did they just make
what they ended up doing was they ended up re-landscaping the back with native flora and fauna, so like native plants and things like that. So they sort of brought it back to a wild space. And the land sort of came down, and then there was a stream that went through a vernal stream. So during certain seasons there was water in it. So they managed to landscape that in such a way too, so that it accentuated that flow of energy of the water. So kind of brought that more back to a natural sort of habitat. So they kind of brought it back to probably, to their best of their ability to what it might have been like before people were living there. But it was interesting, the process, and also the palatable change and shift in energy, like the awareness.
3 weeks is quick.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think they were just like, they were delighted that things were actually happening, like they were listened to, and I think that's also like human beings are the same way. We tend to sort of collapse when we're not seen and witnessed, and we tend to get angry and frustrated and act out more passive aggressive. But I think once we are seen and witnessed, that can shift and change. So I think that's a similar thing.
Yes. Wow, that's a beautiful story. And I'm supposing that they're still happily on their land.
I believe so. It's like anything. That was a while back, and I usually think no news is good news.
Right, exactly. That's usually what happens. People contact us when it's desperate, like, now, help. Right.
Yeah,
when everything's
like yesterday.
Yeah.
Aren't you intuitive? You should have been here yesterday.
Right. That happens too. Yes. The expectations are high.
Yeah.
But, we do our best. We do.
We do.
So what have you found most challenging about what you're doing now? Or, is there any particular...
Actually, the resistance with my peers is the hardest. Some people are so entrenched in their beliefs and their thoughts. Like, change is really hard for people. And I think not that what we've done is irrelevant, but I think it's really important as we acquire new knowledge and we acquire the ability to make changes that we grow into them. And I think this is reflective of our times now. There's so much resistance to change, but we have to change. And I think that's the hard part is how do you navigate that, and how do you draw people into the willingness to change?
Is there a particular concept that inspires you? What gives you hope?
What gives me hope?
Or inspires you to continue?
I think living on this planet is the most amazing thing ever. Even in my darkest days, and I've had some pretty dark days, the thought of leaving here I'm here to fight for it. I'm here because this is the most amazing, beautiful place we could ever live.
Mm.
You know, I mean, yeah, we're human beings. We've done some pretty stupid things, but, you know, there's so much beauty and there's so much amazing mastery of just particles and waves and all of this stuff that magically makes the world that we have, you know, and it's constantly creating itself. Oh my God. Like, we live on a planet that is driven by life force. Like, everything on this planet is driven by life force. Things evolve, things go extinct, more things evolve and grow, new species appear out of nowhere. Like, we're we're exploring the universe out there, and we've yet to find something that has this kind of dynamic to the level that it is. You know, when we think about it, 13.5 billion years ago, comets came from outer space, landed on this hot, rocky planet, and melted and mixed with all of the nutrients of the planet, all this volcanic rock and crumbled stuff, and created these protocells, right? And these protocells figured out how to drink the sun and created photosynthesis that became the plants, that built the atmosphere, that created everything we see right now. Yeah. And, you know, and we've had these kinds of crises. So like those little protocells that created oxygen and farted all around the universe and created oxygen, they about killed the planet. But they figured it out, you know, and we're just a little more complicated now. We got a few more trillion cells, you know, got some organs and some other stuff, thumbs. But we have the same problems to resolve. And I think that's the beauty of being here. I think that's the thing that makes me get up every single day, despite everything that's happened. I just know that, like, there's something rich and exciting and something amazing that's going to happen just because I live here. And I'm part of this. I'm part of whatever this is.
Yes. Yeah. The acknowledgement of that too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is there any words of, need I say wisdom? I don't mean to lay that on you. Sorry. All of my guests are wise. But you know what I mean. Humbly asking and receiving any ideas about how, you know, you might offer something to those that are out there listening, the audience, about how to begin this inward journey for themselves.
I mean, I think the first part is to stop running away from yourself. I mean, we've all made mistakes. We've all have done good and bad things in the world. The first thing is to stop running. That's the first step. And then to also remember that you are the most valuable thing there is. You exist because you are so valuable, the universe created you. And from that, you can begin, you know, whether you're a car mechanic or you're doing the work that I do, everything we do has meaning. Everything we do has value. And how that serves the world, that's, you know, that you know, we can show up any way we want. And that's, I think, you know, the biggest gift, that we show up and we do what we're here to do, what we feel joy in, what we you know, value as being, you know, meaningful. Yeah,
that's
and that,
beautiful.
You know, I just want to say, and I think for a long time it was about the self, and I think now it has to be about the service. And I think that's the other piece of that. We have to serve. We have to remember how to serve. We have to learn how to serve.
Yes, being of service. You have shared with us, I think this is a beautiful segue into it looks to me like a sacred healing fire that you've, video that we're going to show. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I lived, before I moved to New Hampshire, I was living part-time on some land in Connecticut. And we would do regular moon circles and regular moon fires and things like this. So this is a particular moon fire. And the film, the flame is purple, and that was the color of the flame. So it was like this amazing purple flame. And the flute is being played by a friend of mine named Alyssa Olikin. She's an herbalist amongst many things, but she's also a flute player. So she's the one playing the flute. And we would drum and do this regularly to the moon every season. So that's what this video is.
Well, it feels very healing, and ask the audience to drink it in at the end of this conversation, to just really enjoy it and drink it in. Well, Adee, it's been a great pleasure to have you. Thank you for sharing with us some of your journey. We'll probably need to have another conversation later on to extend the conversation about the journey. But I very much appreciate you being here and taking the time to speak with us today. It's just lovely. You can find Adee at, what's your website, Adee?
Okay, I have a website. It's www.thenewglobalshaman.com. I also have a blog that I write fairly regularly in called shamamatlarge.com. That's where you can find me.
Okay, so thenewglobalshaman.com and Global Shaman at Large.
Shaman at Large.
Shaman at Large. Shaman at Large. Okay, we'll have it all written out. We'll get it all straight.
I'll send you over.
Well, yeah, it'll be, yeah.
For the slate.
Yeah, that's right. We want to make sure people can find you. And you also, I want to mention also that you lovingly craft many, many things that are available for those that are interested: rattles, malas, drums, books. Yeah. And
yeah, I do. Thank you. And I have an Etsy site, but you can also contact me directly. I do a lot of custom work, things like that. So.
Okay, excellent. Wonderful, Adee. Thank you so much. And each of Adee's pieces, I just want to mention, is really imbued with this loving kindness. You can feel it in her pieces. They're very powerful. I would urge you to check it out. So, okay, Adee, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was so much fun.
Yes.
Take good care.
You too. All right.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.